Welcome to my very own awards show, the so-called Definitive Awards. I look back through the year to see which games really stood out from the rest in my eyes, in some very simple and easy to explain categories. The intention being to show footage of some possible contenders, but primarily to discuss the winners and why they stood out to me. So without further ado, let's begin. The first category is very easy to explain. Which virtual reality title did I enjoy the most from this year? And this could either be a game, an application, or an experience. So 2016 finally saw VR being truly opened up for the public to get their grubby little mitts on and try it out, and although it's still very new tech, it's much better than I thought it would be. The fact I was amazed by leaning over a wall that wasn't there shows how easily impressed I am. The major problem with it at the moment is the distinct lack of actual game content in the majority of the releases. Most of them amount to tech demos or virtual experiences, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but if this is truly the future of gaming, then it needs some proper games to prove itself. That all being said, I did still have one standout game on my admittedly quite short list of VR games. The only one which I have a significant amount of time recorded in, and that is Audio Shield. So Audio Shield was actually a launch title for the Vive, and although it's a very simple concept based on some of the same principles as their previous game Audio Surf, I've enjoyed my time immensely time and time again. It consists of carrying two coloured shields and beats flying at your face generated from whatever music you've chosen to listen to. The objective is very simple. Hit them with the relevant shield, and it doesn't really go much further than that. But the reason that I think I found it so entertaining is that it encourages you to hit faster and be more stylish by awarding points for doing so, which means you end up getting a full body workout once you're on the highest difficulty. I imagine it to be somewhere between boxing and Zumba. I enjoy my music and I like my rhythm games as well, and somehow they've tricked me into playing what could essentially be described as a dancing game, as well as doing something which constitutes as exercise. Any game which achieves that is doing well in my book. It's also one of the only games I've played in VR which uses a movement system that just works. Admittedly, it doesn't have to do a lot, but it's still more competent than most of the attempts at first-person shooters I've seen. Regardless, I'm eager to see what 2017 has to offer in terms of VR, and hope to see some more games which contain more than 10 to 20 minutes of content. The next category is called Most Addictive, and this comes down to which games I've played for the longest, and still kept going back to for more. I renamed this category several times, but you could almost describe it as my comfort game. This year was played with competitive multiplayer titles vying for attention and trying to fight their way into everyone's free time and onto all of the esports agendas, many of which went down the route of hero-based deathmatch of some description, some more successfully than others. In order to keep up with the constant flow of trying out new games, it took a lot for the games to pull me away, as time was a commodity and playing one game obsessively was very rare. However, one certain game almost derailed my intention to release a review every week. A game which I didn't even intend to review, but because I had played it far too much, it left me with no choice but to do a blunt review on it, and of course this award goes to Civilization 6. Who would have thought that Civilization would be still as addictive as it was back in 1991, the strategy empire building simulator which steals your life one turn at a time, and although the game has evolved a lot through its various iterations and spin-offs, the core game is still intact. Civilization 6 continues on with a hex-style grid, but also introduces more complexity into the organisation of cities, and also has some of the usual expansion pack content included from the start, things like religion and espionage. I frequently found myself saying, okay, I can play this for an hour or two, and then I've got to go and do other things, and then 4 or sometimes more hours later going, well, I can do it tomorrow anyway. I'll just finish getting this next government or some equally feeble excuse. It's one which little stories started forming behind the battles as I tried to spread various inappropriately named religions into unwilling neighbours, and started rivalries with nations just because they dared to start on the same island I did. It had and still does have some teething issues, but for some reason I'm willing to overlook these problems even though I lost about 8 hours of game time to a bug, and will never get to see the conclusion of religion being defeated by the all-knowing power of science. All the more reason to start from scratch and get another game in. Now we move on to Best Indie Title. This would be a relatively easy to define category if indie title still meant what it did when the term was first used. The definition I'm choosing to use is developed by a small studio and independent of a major publisher. I tried out far more indie titles this year than I normally do, and although there have been a few that I couldn't personally learn to love, I could still see the value of them as a game and an experience. There is one thing, however, that I would like to see much less of, and that is pixel graphics. I appreciate that they're easier to do and equally effective, but it's now been overused and has lost its charm and appeal. I would like to see some more cartoony styles that are unique in some other way. My favourite indie title has remained on my list since it was first added back in February, because I intend to start it again and do it one more time when I get a chance, and that is Subterrane. It's been a long while since I first played through Subterrane, so while I don't remember a lot of the finer details, I do remember being initially confused by all of the interfaces and how the space base all worked, and as the jigsaw started to go together, my love for it grew. When I looked back through my list of reviews to see which indie games stood out, only this and Killing Room really stood out as games I would want to play more of, but Subterrane won out on the basis of it being a more polished and complete offering. Subterrane is a top-down survival RPG set in a space base which has been infested with some kind of mutation or disease. You play as Dr. West and have to reassemble what remains to try and escape that hellhole. It does a great job of portraying a very isolated and lonely space base, and even made me jump on more than one occasion as I got hit in the back from a monster that managed to sneak up on me, or I just happened to miss from my first initial glance through the room. I had to start it again in order to get the footage to add into these awards, and I've noticed a huge amount of changes to the main hub of the game, which at a first glance irons out a lot of the real complaints that I had about it. Originally there was a lot of toing and froing required to run the space base, but now I've got my foot in the door to start that second playthrough, combined with the changes made to the menus and layout of the game in general, it makes it a much more appealing offer. This time I even found a torch within the first 20 minutes. And last, and certainly not least, because it's my Game of the Year award, which is probably the easiest to define out of all of the categories, simply which game did I enjoy the most this year? For me, this year had some very clear standout releases from the beginning, most of which were hyped to insane proportions and could never live up to their reputation, but some definitely did, and others got the opposite and managed to surpass expectation. Now, I do understand why people get excited about releases, and it's good that people are interested in games being the best that they can be. But this year is a fine example as to why everyone should calm it down a little bit and not immediately jump on the next hype train. Fortunately, I seem to duck past most of the year's major clangers, but there's also a few which I avoided and will pick up at a later date when the developers finally decide to optimise their games for more than just the consoles. My Game of the Year was a relatively easy choice, as it's one which I enjoyed both its single player and its multiplayer. It survived the torment of being a successor in a legacy in which it would be forever compared to the father of the genre itself, and it even dared to steal its name. Doom. You know how I just spoke about hype and don't jump on the bandwagon? I will admit that it's somewhat hypocritical of me when I myself spouted about how excited I was in the weeks leading up to Doom's release, but I feel somewhat justified given that I participated in all three of the betas. I did have several reservations, however, given that Rage exists, Doom 3 wasn't quite the showstopper everyone thought it would be, and id Software haven't exactly done a lot for a good number of years, but it doesn't seem to have fazed them at all. Doom 4 really demonstrated again what first-person shooters used to be about, being an unstoppable killing machine that doesn't hide when the demons come a-knocking, but instead blasting the face off of any that dare come near. I love how it did all the reminiscent stuff but still introduced new elements, particularly the vertical style of the gameplay. The ability to double jump and climb ledges meant that every fight was challenging and different, but it didn't feel clumsy. The introduction of glory kills was something I wasn't keen on when I first heard about it, but Doom showed that you can implement a mechanic like this and not have to slow the game down too much, and even built it in as a core way to regenerate health and supplies. Soon enough I was trying to get into each of the different animations because they were so damn cool. Regardless of all of the hype one way or another, Doom arrived, it kicked ass, and I loved every minute of it. Well, that concludes my first ever award ceremony. I hope you enjoyed listening to my reasoning behind them. Obviously I didn't get to play every game released in 2016, and that may be why your top game wasn't included. So if you have any that you thought I missed out on, please let me know. It also concludes my first year of doing reviews. I've created over 60 videos for this channel this year, which amounts to 4.5 hours of content, and played far more new games than I ever have done before. I'm going to try and mix things up a little bit next year to allow for playing bigger games that I simply couldn't complete in a week, and as part of that, if anyone has any suggestions on the kind of content they'd like to see, I'd love to hear it. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in to hear my thoughts, liked my videos, commented, or subscribed along the way. Have a happy new year and all the best for 2017.